The story begins not with blood, but with promise. In the early 16th century, England stood on the edge of greatness, and at its center was a young king, charming, athletic, intelligent, and adored by his people. His name was Henry VIII. When Henry ascended the throne in 1509, he was everything a monarch should be. He was tall, handsome, and charismatic, with a love for music, poetry, and sport. Courtiers praised him. Foreign rulers respected him. His people admired him. But beneath that golden image lay something far more dangerous. A man who feared one thing above all else: being forgotten. Because in Henry's world, power meant legacy, and legacy meant a male heir. Without a son, a king's line could collapse. Civil war could return. Chaos could swallow the kingdom whole. And so, Henry's life became consumed by a single obsession: to secure a son at any cost. At first, everything seemed perfect. Henry married Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess and the widow of his older brother. Their union was seen as a political triumph, binding England and Spain together in a powerful alliance. Catherine was intelligent, strong, and deeply devoted to Henry. For years, she stood beside him not just as a wife, but as a capable queen, governing in his absence, advising him in matters of state, and earning the love of the English people. But there was a problem. Despite multiple pregnancies, Catherine failed to give Henry what he desperately needed: a surviving male heir. One by one, their children died. Miscarriages, stillbirths, infants who didn't survive beyond a few weeks. Only one child lived, a daughter. Her name was Mary. To most fathers, a daughter would have been a blessing. But to Henry, she was not enough. The fear began to grow. What if his dynasty ended with him? What if England fell back into the chaos of rival claims and civil war? What if history forgot him? And that fear slowly began to twist into something darker. At first, Henry remained patient. He stayed loyal to Catherine for nearly 2 decades. But as the years passed, patience turned to frustration, and frustration turned to desperation. Then, everything changed. At court, a young woman appeared. She was not a princess, not a queen, not even a noble of great power. But she had something far more dangerous: charm. Her name was Anne Boleyn, and was different from the other women at court. She was witty, bold, and captivating. She refused to be just another mistress. She played a far more dangerous game, one that would change the course of history forever. Henry became obsessed, and would not give herself to him, not without a crown. And so, the King of England found himself in an impossible situation. He was already married, but he wanted another woman. In most cases, this would have been a scandal. But for Henry, it became something far greater. It became a war. Henry sought to annul his marriage to Catherine. He argued that their union was cursed, that it violated divine law because she had once been married to his brother. But there was a problem. The Pope refused. And in that moment, Henry made a decision that would shake the very foundations of England. If the church would not give him what he wanted, he would break the church itself. Henry separated England from the authority of the Pope and declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. It was an act of rebellion, of ambition, and of pure, unstoppable will, all for one woman and one son who did not yet exist. Catherine was cast aside, stripped of her title, declared no longer queen, and Boleyn rose in her place. And just like that, England changed forever. But this was only the beginning, because Henry's hunger for power, love, and legacy would not stop with Anne. It would consume wife after wife, until love turned to betrayal, and betrayal turned to execution. 6 women would marry Henry VIII. Only one would die as queen. 2 would lose their heads, and 1 would outlive the king himself. This is not just a story of marriage. It is a story of obsession, power, and survival. And it all began with a king who refused to accept fate. She was never meant to be queen. In the glittering court of Henry VIII, women came and went like whispers, noticed, admired, and forgotten. But Anne Boleyn was different. She didn't just enter court. She disrupted it, and had spent years in the refined courts of France, where she learned elegance, wit, and the art of influence. When she returned to England, she brought something rare: confidence. She spoke boldly, laughed freely, and most dangerously of all, she understood power. At first, Henry saw her as nothing more than a distraction, a fresh face, a new fascination, and refused to play the role expected of her. She would not be his mistress. Where other women surrendered and resisted, where others obeyed and challenged, and that defiance ignited something inside the king. Desire turned into obsession. Henry wrote her letters, passionate, desperate, almost pleading. He called her his mistress and friend, promising devotion, power, and even marriage, and stood firm. No crown, no king. It was a gamble no one had dared before, and somehow it worked. Years passed as Henry fought to free himself from Catherine of Aragon. The court was divided. Some saw her as a temptress, a manipulator. Others saw her as a bold woman reshaping her destiny. But one thing was certain: Anne Boleyn was changing England. When Henry finally broke from Rome and established the Church of England, it wasn't just a political move. It was personal. It was for her. In 1533, Anne Boleyn became queen. The coronation was magnificent, gold, silk, celebration. But beneath the splendor lurked tension. The people whispered. The nobles watched carefully. And far away, the discarded Catherine still called herself the true queen and had won the crown. But she had not won the kingdom. Still, she believed she held the one thing that mattered most: Henry's love. And soon, she believed she would give him the one thing he desired above all else: a son. When and became pregnant. Anticipation filled the court. This was it, the moment everything had been sacrificed for. Henry was certain his son was coming. But fate had other plans. In September 1533, Anne gave birth, not to a prince, but to a daughter. Her name was Elizabeth. For a brief moment, disappointment hung in the air. But Anne reassured Henry. She was young. There would be more children. There had to be. But time began to turn against her. Anne's position was fragile. She had enemies, powerful ones. Men who had supported Catherine. Courtiers who resented her influence. Advisors who feared her sharp tongue and bold opinions. And slowly, dangerously, Henry's love began to fade. The charm that once captivated him now irritated him. Her confidence became arrogance in his eyes. Her voice, once alluring, became unwelcome. Worse still, Anne failed to produce a son. Pregnancies ended in miscarriage. Hopes shattered again and again. And with each loss, Henry grew colder, more distant, more dangerous. At court, whispers turned into accusations. She's bewitched him. She's unfaithful. She's a threat. Whether true or not didn't matter, because in Henry's world, suspicion alone could be fatal. And then the unthinkable happened. Anne was arrested, charged with adultery, accused of sleeping with multiple men, even her own brother. The charges were shocking, scandalous, and almost certainly fabricated. But truth was irrelevant. Henry had already decided her fate. The woman he had once defied the church for, the queen he had risked everything to marry, was now his enemy, and was taken to the Tower of London, alone, abandoned, waiting, in the days leading to her execution, and remained composed. Some said she laughed. Others said she prayed. Perhaps she did both. Because what else could she do? She had played the greatest game in England and lost. On May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked to the scaffold. She wore a gray gown and a calm expression. The crowd watched in silence as she knelt, her fate sealed. Her final words were not of anger, but of grace. She praised the king, the very man who had condemned her. Moments later, a single stroke ended her life. And just like that, the queen was gone. But her story was far from over, because the daughter she left behind, Elizabeth, would one day become one of England's greatest rulers. A queen far more powerful than any son Henry had ever dreamed of. But Henry did not know that yet. No, Henry was already looking ahead, because before Anne's body had even grown cold, he had chosen his next wife, a quiet, gentle woman who could not have been more different from Anne Boleyn. Her name was Jane Seymour, and she would give Henry exactly what he wanted, but at a cost no one could have imagined. She was everything Anne Boleyn was not. Where Anne had been bold, sharp, and unyielding, Jane Seymour was quiet, gentle, and obedient. She did not challenge the king. She did not play dangerous games. She simply waited. And in the dangerous world of Henry VIII's court, patience could be more powerful than ambition. Jane first appeared as a lady-in-waiting, serving both Catherine of Aragon and later Anne Boleyn. She had watched everything unfold, the rise, the power, and the terrifying fall. She understood the rules, and she knew exactly what kind of woman Henry wanted now. Not another Anne, never again. By the time he was arrested, Jane had already captured Henry's attention. But unlike Anne, she did not resist him with fire. She resisted him with silence. When Henry sent her gifts, she returned them. When he pursued her, she remained distant. But her message was clear. She would not be his mistress, only his queen. It was a haunting echo of Anne Boleyn's strategy, but without the danger, without the defiance, without the threat. And for Henry, that difference was everything. Only days after Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry and Jane were engaged. The speed was shocking. The message was clear and had been erased. Jane was the future. They were married in May 1536 in a quiet ceremony. No grand coronation, no lavish celebration. It was as if Henry wanted to forget everything that had come before. Jane became queen, and from the very beginning, she understood her purpose. She was not there for love. She was there for one thing only, to give the king a son. Unlike Anne, Jane avoided politics. She spoke softly, dressed modestly, and presented herself as a perfect, obedient wife. She even worked to reconcile Henry with his daughter Mary I of England, who had been cast aside after Catherine's fall. It was a small but significant victory, one that pleased the king. For the first time in years, the court felt calm. No scandal, no rebellion, no whispers of betrayal, just quiet hope. And then Jane became pregnant. This time, everything was different. Henry was cautious, careful, almost afraid to hope too much. The memory of lost children still haunted him. But as the months passed, the signs were promising. The court held its breath. England waited. And finally, in October 1537, the moment came. Jane went into labor. Hours passed, then days. The birth was long, agonizing, dangerous. But at last, a cry filled the room. A child was born, a boy. His name was Edward, the future king, the long-awaited heir. At last, Henry had what he had spent decades searching for, a son. Celebrations erupted across England. Bells rang. Fires burned through the night. The kingdom rejoiced. Jane Seymour had succeeded where the others had failed. She had secured the Tudor legacy. She had given Henry everything. But something was wrong. In the days after the birth, Jane did not recover. At first, it seemed like exhaustion, the toll of a difficult labor. But soon it became clear it was far worse. An infection had taken hold. Fever spread through her body. Her strength faded. The queen who brought so much joy now lay helpless, slipping further away with each passing hour. Henry visited her, but there was nothing he could do. For once, the king was powerless. On October 24th, 1537, just days after giving birth, Jane Seymour died. She was 28 years old. The court fell into mourning, and for the first time in this brutal story, Henry grieved, truly grieved. Jane had given him the one thing he valued above all else. And in doing so, she had lost her life. To Henry, she became something the others never had. Perfect, not because she was flawless, but because she had fulfilled her role completely. She gave him a son, and then she was gone. No betrayal, no scandal, no defiance, just sacrifice. Henry would later be buried beside her, as if she alone had been his true wife. But grief, like love, does not last forever in the heart of a king. Time moved on, and so did Henry, because despite finally having a son, Henry still needed alliances, power, stability in a world that was turning against him. And once again, marriage became his weapon. His advisors searched for a new bride, not for love, but for politics, a foreign alliance, a strategic union, a queen who could strengthen England's position in Europe. They found her in a distant land, a German princess, whose fate would become one of the strangest in Henry's long line of marriages. Her name was Anne of Cleves, and her story would begin with a portrait and end with humiliation. This marriage began with a lie, not spoken aloud, not written in ink, but painted. In the court of Henry VIII, alliances were everything. England stood isolated, threatened by powerful Catholic nations who saw Henry as a rebel king after his break from Rome. He needed allies. He needed protection. And so his advisors turned to Germany, to a Protestant duchy that could strengthen England's position in Europe. There, they found a suitable bride. Her name was Anne of Cleves. She was noble, well-born, and politically ideal. But there was one problem. Henry had never seen her. So he did what kings often did. He trusted a portrait. The artist chosen for this task was Hans Holbein the Younger, a master painter known for his remarkable ability to capture likeness with precision. He was sent to Cleves to paint, and accurately, faithfully, without exaggeration. When the portrait returned to England, Henry was pleased. The woman in the painting appeared graceful, refined, even beautiful. And that was enough. The marriage was arranged. But paintings can deceive. In late 1539, Anne of Cleves arrived in England. She had traveled far, leaving behind her home, her language, and everything familiar, heading toward a future she could not control. Henry, eager and curious, decided to meet her in secret. Disguised, he rode to greet her unexpectedly, hoping to recreate the romantic gestures of chivalric tales. But when he saw her, everything fell apart. Anne did not recognize him. She did not respond with excitement or admiration. Instead, she remained polite, distant, confused, and Henry, humiliated, reacted with cold disappointment. Later, he would describe her cruelly, claiming she was nothing like her portrait, calling her unattractive, even repulsive. "The thing is nothing so fair as she had been reported," he said. Whether this was truth or wounded pride, no one could say. But one thing was certain. Henry did not want her, and yet the marriage went ahead anyway. On January 6, 1540, Henry VIII married Anne of Cleves. The ceremony was grand, but the atmosphere was hollow. This was not a union of desire. It was a political obligation, and from the very beginning, it was doomed. Henry avoided her. He found excuses not to be alone with her. He complained openly to his advisors, expressing regret, frustration, even disgust. But the greatest problem was one that could not be hidden. The marriage was never consummated. Henry claimed he could not bring himself to fulfill his duty as a husband, and in the dangerous world of royal politics, this changed everything. Because if the marriage was not consummated, it could be undone. Within months, Henry began seeking a way out. But unlike Catherine and Boleyn, Anne of Cleves faced a different fate. She was not accused, not betrayed, not executed. Instead, she made a choice. When Henry's advisors approached her with the idea of annulment and did something unexpected, she agreed. No resistance, no fight, no drama. She accepted the end of her marriage with calm dignity. And in doing so, she saved her life. In July 1540, the marriage was officially annulled. Anne was no longer queen, but she was not cast aside completely. Henry granted her a generous settlement. She received estates, wealth, and a new title, the king's beloved sister. She lived comfortably in England, respected and secure, in a court where queens lost their heads. Anne of Cleves walked away, free. It was a rare victory in a story filled with tragedy. But while Anne stepped out of danger, another woman was stepping into it. Because even before the annulment was finalized, Henry had already set his eyes on someone new. She was young, beautiful, and dangerously unprepared for the role she was about to play. Her name was Catherine Howard, and her story would be one of passion, recklessness, and a fall far more brutal than Anne Boleyn's. She was young, far too young. When Catherine Howard entered the court of Henry VIII, she was barely more than a girl, lively, charming, and full of energy. In a palace weighed down by politics, fear, and aging power, she felt like something rare, a spark of youth, and Henry noticed immediately. By now, the king was no longer the golden prince he once had been. Time had changed him. His body was heavier, his leg injured and often in pain, his temper unpredictable. But Catherine, Catherine made him feel young again. She laughed at his jokes, danced with him, flattered him in ways that reignited something long buried. To Henry, she was not just a new wife. She was a second chance, a chance to reclaim the vitality he had lost. And so in 1540, just days after his marriage to Anne Cleves was annulled, Henry married Catherine Howard. The difference was immediate. Where and had been a political necessity, Catherine was pure desire. Henry showered her with gifts, jewels, gowns, attention. He called her his rose without a thorn. The court transformed around her. Music returned. Dancing filled the halls. Laughter echoed once more. For a brief moment, it felt like happiness. But beneath the surface, something dangerous was growing, because Catherine Howard carried secrets. Before becoming queen, she had lived a life far less controlled than most noble women. Raised in a household where discipline was loose and supervision lacking, Catherine had formed relationships, romantic, intimate, and hidden. In another life, these might have been forgotten, but not here, not in the court of Henry VIII, because the past never stays buried in a palace filled with enemies. At first, whispers began quietly, servants talking, old acquaintances remembering, then names surfaced, men who had known Catherine too well. One of them was Francis Derham, a man who claimed he and Catherine had once been promised each other. Another was Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's court, handsome, favored, and dangerously close to the queen. And suddenly, suspicion turned into something far worse. Accusation. The idea that Catherine had been unchaste before marriage was scandalous enough. But the possibility that she had been unfaithful after becoming queen, that was treason. And treason meant death. At first, Henry refused to believe it. He couldn't. Not Catherine. Not his sweet, joyful queen. But evidence began to mount. Testimonies. Letters. Confessions forced from terrified witnesses. The truth, or something that resembled it, began to take shape. And Henry's love turned into something far more terrifying. Rage. Catherine was arrested, taken from the palace she had once filled with laughter and locked away, isolated, frightened, and facing a fate she could barely comprehend. Gone were the dances, gone were the smiles. All that remained was fear. It is said that when she learned of her impending execution, Catherine practiced placing her head on the block, trying to understand how to face death with dignity. She was still just a girl, but she was about to die as a traitor. On February 13th, 1542, Catherine Howard was led to the scaffold at the Tower of London. The crowd watched in silence. The same fate that had claimed Anne Boleyn now awaited her. But Catherine was not Anne. She had no grand speeches, no calculated composure, only fear and regret. Her final words were simple. She admitted her faults. She prayed for mercy. And then she knelt. Moments later, the blade fell, and just like that, another queen was gone. Henry had once again destroyed the woman he claimed to love. 2 wives executed, 2 marriages erased, and still, the king lived on. But something had changed. This time, there was no celebration, no immediate remarriage, only silence. Henry was older now, more suspicious, more isolated. The court had become a place of quiet tension, where trust was rare and loyalty was uncertain. And yet, even after all the bloodshed, there would be one final queen, one last marriage. But this time, the story would be different, because the woman who came next did not seek power or love, but survival. Her name was Catherine Parr, and she would face a king more dangerous than ever before, a king nearing the end of his life, but not the end of his cruelty. By the time Catherine Parr entered the life of Henry VIII, the pattern was clear. Marriage to the king was not a union. It was a risk, a gamble where the stakes were life and death. 2 queens had been cast aside. 2 had been executed. One had died, giving him a son. One had escaped. And now it was Catherine Parr's turn. But Catherine was not like the others. She was older, twice widowed, experienced, and highly educated. She had lived enough life to understand something most did not. Henry VIII was no longer a man to love. He was a man to survive. When Henry proposed to her in 1543, Catherine already had feelings for another man. Thomas Seymour, the brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour. But refusing the king was not an option. It never had been. So Catherine made her choice. Not for love, not for ambition, but for survival. She said yes. From the very beginning, Catherine approached her role differently. She did not rely on beauty or charm alone. She relied on intelligence. She understood Henry's moods, his pride, his need to feel superior. And she used that understanding carefully. Because by now, Henry had become a shadow of the man he once was. His body was failing him. His leg, badly wounded, caused constant pain and infection. He could barely walk. His temper had grown unpredictable, explosive one moment, withdrawn the next. And worst of all, he trusted no one. The court had become a dangerous place, filled with factions, spies, and silent enemies. Religious tensions were rising, dividing England between traditional Catholic beliefs and the new Protestant ideas Henry himself had unleashed. And Catherine Parr had opinions. She was deeply interested in religion, particularly in the reformist ideas spreading across Europe. She read widely, discussed theology, and even published religious writings, something almost unheard of for a queen. At first, Henry admired her intellect. He enjoyed their conversations, their debates. But in a court where knowledge could be mistaken for defiance, admiration could quickly turn into suspicion. And it did. Catherine began engaging Henry in religious discussions, sometimes even disagreeing with him. To her, it was conversation. To others, it was dangerous. Enemies at court took notice. They saw an opportunity. She challenges the king. She spreads radical ideas. She is a threat. The whispers began again, and this time they reached Henry, already weakened by illness, surrounded by paranoia. Henry began to question Catherine's loyalty. Was she too bold? Too independent? Too dangerous? The answer, in his mind, became clear. Yes, a warrant was drawn up for her arrest. The charge? Heresy. And in Henry's England, heresy could mean only one thing: death. The same fate that had claimed Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard was now closing in on Catherine Parr. But Catherine was not naive. She saw the danger before it fully arrived, and instead of resisting, she adapted. In a moment of brilliance, Catherine approached Henry, not as a challenger, but as a submissive wife. She apologized. She humbled herself. She told him that their debates had never been meant to oppose him, but to learn from him, to admire his wisdom. She played the role perfectly. Not weak, but strategic. And Henry believed her. His anger faded, his pride soothed, and just like that, her life was spared. When officials later arrived to arrest her, Henry dismissed them angrily, denying the very order he had given. Catherine Parr had done the impossible. She had outmaneuvered the king. She had survived. And not just survived, she thrived. During Henry's final years, Catherine took on a role no other wife had fully embraced, that of a caretaker. She nursed him through illness. She managed the royal household. She even acted as regent while he was away on campaign, governing England in his absence. And perhaps most importantly, she helped restore Henry's relationship with his children. Mary I of England, Elizabeth I, and young Edward VI were brought back into the royal fold, their position strengthened. Catherine was not just a survivor. She was a stabilizer, a quiet force holding together a fractured family. And then, in January 1547, it ended. Henry VIII died. The king who had dominated England and the lives of 6 women was gone. At last, Catherine Parr was free. Free to live, free to love, free to choose her own path. And she did. Soon after Henry's death, she married the man she had once loved, Thomas Seymour. But even in freedom, tragedy followed. Catherine would die just a year later after giving birth. Her story, like so many others in Henry's life, ended in sorrow. But unlike the women before her, she had escaped the blade. She had outlived the king. And in doing so, she became the final chapter in one of history's most haunting stories. When Henry VIII died in 1547, the chaos he left behind did not end. It evolved, because Henry had spent his life chasing one goal above all others: a son, an heir, a future for his dynasty. And in the end, He got one. But what he didn't realize was that his true legacy would not be defined by the son he fought so hard to create, but by the daughters he tried to cast aside. 3 children stood in the shadow of his throne, a boy and 2 girls, each born of different mothers, each shaped by the king's relentless ambition, and each destined to rule England in their own way. The fragile king, Edward VI, Henry's long-awaited son, Edward, became king at just 9 years old. He was a child of Jane Seymour, the queen who had given everything to bring him into the world. But Edward's reign was not his own. Too young to rule, he became a figure controlled by powerful advisors, men who pushed England further into Protestant reform. Churches changed. Traditions were broken. The country shifted rapidly away from its Catholic past. Edward was intelligent, serious, and deeply religious, but he was also fragile, sickly, weak, a king in name but not in strength. And then, just 6 years after taking the throne, he died, at only 15 years old. The son Henry had sacrificed everything for was gone. The rejected daughter, Mary I of England, after Edward's death. The crown passed to Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, the same daughter Henry had once declared illegitimate. The same girl who had watched her mother cast aside. The same woman who had endured years of humiliation, isolation, and fear. Now, she was queen, and she had not forgotten. Mary was fiercely Catholic, determined to undo the religious changes her father had set in motion. She restored the authority of the church. She reversed Protestant reforms. And most famously, she punished those who opposed her. Hundreds of Protestants were executed during her reign, burned at the stake for heresy. It earned her a name that would echo through history, Bloody Mary. But behind that title was something deeper, a woman shaped by trauma. A queen tried to reclaim a world that had been taken from her, yet despite her power, Mary faced the same cruel fate as her mother. She could not produce an heir, and when she died in 1558, the crown passed to the last child of Henry VIII, the daughter of the woman he had executed. The queen who changed everything, Elizabeth I, she was never meant to rule, declared illegitimate, branded the daughter of a traitor, cast aside after the execution of Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth grew up in uncertainty, never knowing if she would rise or fall like her mother. But she learned, she watched, she survived, and when the crown came to her, she transformed everything. Elizabeth I became one of the greatest rulers England had ever known. Her reign brought stability, strength, and a cultural golden age. Exploration expanded. The arts flourished. England rose as a major power on the world stage. She ruled for 44 years. And she did something her father never could. She ruled without a husband, without a king, without surrendering her power. She became known as the Virgin Queen. But more importantly, she became a symbol of control, intelligence, and resilience. The daughter Henry had once rejected became his greatest legacy, a dynasty written in blood. In the end, Henry VIII's story was not just about his wives. It was about what he left behind. A kingdom transformed, a church divided, a dynasty built on obsession and sacrifice. He had broken England away from Rome. He had reshaped religion to serve his will. He had married 6 women in pursuit of a single goal. And yet, the future of England was not secured by his son, but by his daughters, women who endured his decisions, who survived his legacy, who ruled in ways he never imagined. Each of Henry's queens had played a role in shaping history. Catherine of Aragon, the queen who stood firm, Anne Boleyn, the woman who changed a nation, Jane Seymour, the mother of a king, and of Cleves, the survivor, Catherine Howard, the tragedy, Catherine Parr, the strategist. 6 women, 6 fates, all tied to one man. But their stories did not end with Henry's death. They lived on through the rulers who followed, through the kingdom they helped shape, through the history that still remembers them. But beyond politics, beyond power, there is something darker at the heart of this story. Because Henry VIII did not just change England. He changed the meaning of love, loyalty, and survival within his court. And in the end, one question remains. Was he a great king or a dangerous man who bent a nation to his will. To understand the fate of the 6 wives, you must understand the man behind them. Henry VIII was not born a tyrant. He became one. In his youth, Henry was admired across Europe. He was educated, athletic, and deeply charismatic. He wrote poetry, played music, and believed in ideals of chivalry and honor. He was, in many ways, the perfect prince. But perfection, when mixed with power, can become something far more dangerous. Because Henry was never meant to be king. That role belonged to his older brother, Arthur. But when Arthur died suddenly, Henry inherited not just a throne, but the pressure that came with it. A pressure he was never fully prepared for. From the very beginning of his reign, Henry carried a silent fear that everything he had could be taken away. And in Tudor England, that fear was not unfounded. The memory of the Wars of the Roses still haunted the kingdom, a brutal period of civil war where rival families fought for control of the crown. Kings had been overthrown, dynasties destroyed, bloodlines erased. Henry knew what happened to weak rulers. They didn't last. And so he became determined to be the opposite, strong, unquestioned, absolute. But power alone was not enough. He needed something more permanent, a legacy, a son, because without a male heir, everything he built could collapse after his death. This was not just a desire. It became an obsession. And like all obsessions, it began to distort his reality. Each failed pregnancy, each lost child, each daughter instead of a son. To Henry, these were not accidents of nature. They were signs, punishments, proof that something was wrong. And when things went wrong in Henry's world, someone had to be blamed. First, it was Catherine of Aragon. Their long marriage, once filled with respect, became in his eyes a mistake, a union cursed by God. Then it was Anne Boleyn, the woman he once risked everything for, became, in his mind, a failure, even a traitor. And later, Catherine Howard, the young queen who brought him joy, became a symbol of betrayal. This pattern reveals something deeper. Henry did not just fear losing power. He feared losing control. And when reality did not match his expectations, he reshaped reality itself. He changed religion. He rewrote laws. He redefined marriage, all to serve his needs. This is where power becomes dangerous, when a man no longer adapts to the world, but forces the world to adapt to him. And over time, Henry's personality began to change. Historians often point to a critical moment, a jousting accident in 1536. Henry was thrown from his horse, badly injured and unconscious for hours. Some believe this event altered him permanently. After the accident, his behavior grew more erratic, more paranoid, more ruthless. Whether physical or psychological, something shifted. The charming king became unpredictable. The romantic husband became suspicious. The confident ruler became defensive, and those closest to him suffered the most, because Henry's love was never stable. It was intense, consuming, and conditional. He adored his wives until they disappointed him. Then they became obstacles. And in Henry's world, obstacles were removed, not negotiated with, not forgiven. Removed. This is what makes his story so unsettling. It is not just about cruelty. It is about transformation. How a man can begin with promise and end in destruction. How power, when left unchecked, can reshape a person's mind. How fear of loss, of weakness, of being forgotten, can drive someone to control everything around them, even the lives of those they once loved. But perhaps the most tragic part of Henry's story is this. He never truly found what he was looking for. Yes, he had a son. Yes, he secured his throne. Yes, he reshaped England. But at what cost? 6 marriages, 2 executions, a kingdom divided, and a legacy forever marked by blood. In the end, Henry VIII was not just a king. He was a man at war, not with his enemies, but with his own fears. 6 women married Henry VIII. 6 women entered a world where love was uncertain and survival was never guaranteed. But if this was a game, a dangerous, deadly game of power, loyalty, and fate, then the question remains. Who won? The queen who lost everything, Catherine of Aragon, She began as the perfect queen, loyal, devoted, respected. For nearly 20 years, Catherine stood beside Henry, supporting him, advising him, loving him. And in return, she was cast aside, stripped of her title, separated from her daughter, declared invalid in the eyes of the kingdom she once ruled. But Catherine never surrendered. Even in exile, she called herself the true queen. She died alone, but undefeated. In a way, she lost everything, but she never lost herself. The queen who changed history, Anne Boleyn, and did what no woman had ever done. She made a king break a church. She transformed England. She reshaped history. But her rise was as dangerous as it was extraordinary, because the higher she climbed, the harder she fell. Accused, imprisoned, executed. Her story ended on the scaffold. And yet, her legacy lived on through her daughter, Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs, and lost her life. But she changed the world. The queen who succeeded and paid the price, Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour did exactly what Henry wanted. She gave him a son, Edward VI. She brought peace to the court. She fulfilled her role perfectly. And then she died. In Henry's eyes, she became his true wife, the only one buried beside him, the only one remembered without scandal. Jane achieved what no one else could, but it cost her everything. The queen who escaped Anne of Cleves, in a court where queens lost their heads. Anne of Cleves walked away. Her marriage was a failure. Her husband rejected her, but when given a choice, she chose survival. She accepted the annulment. She avoided conflict, and in return, she gained freedom, wealth, and respect. She outlived Henry. She lived comfortably. She endured. In a game of survival, Anne of Cleves may have played it best. The queen who never understood the danger, Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard entered the court as a girl, young, carefree, unprepared. She became queen not through strategy, but through charm. And in a world like Henry's, that was not enough. Her past caught up with her. Her mistakes became crimes, and her life ended on the execution block. Catherine did not play the game. She didn't even know it existed, and that is why she lost. The queen who outsmarted the king, Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr understood something the others did not. You don't win against Henry VIII. You survive him. She adapted. She observed. She knew when to speak and when to stay silent. When danger came, she didn't fight it. She defused it. And in doing so, she became the only wife to truly outmaneuver the king. She lived. She loved again. She walked away. In a story filled with tragedy, she was the closest thing to a victor. So, who truly won? Was it the woman who changed history? The one who gave birth to a king? The one who survived? Or the one who ruled after all ended? Because if we look beyond Henry, if we look at the future, the answer becomes clear. The true winner was not a wife, but a daughter, Elizabeth I, the child of Anne Boleyn, the girl once declared illegitimate, the queen who ruled longer, stronger, and wiser than her father ever did. She did not just survive Henry's legacy. She mastered it. 6 wives, 6 fates, each one a reflection of Henry himself, his desires, his fears, his power. But in the end, none of them truly belonged to him, because history remembered them not as his possessions, but as women who endured him. History does not remember kings for their kindness. It remembers them for their impact. And few kings left an impact as violent, personal, and permanent as Henry VIII. When he died in 1547, England did not simply lose a monarch. It inherited a legacy of transformation, a broken church, a reshaped monarchy, a new religious identity, and a royal family scarred by ambition, fear, and obsession. But beneath the politics, beneath the wars and reforms, there is something more human, a story of 6 women, each one pulled into the orbit of a man who believed love could be controlled, that marriage could solve destiny, that power could silence fate itself. But instead, it exposed the deepest weaknesses of a king, a kingdom rewritten. Henry's greatest legacy was not his marriages. It was his break from Rome, the creation of the Church of England, a decision born not only from politics, but from desire, from obsession, from refusal to accept limitation. And in doing so, he reshaped centuries of religion and authority. But even as he changed the world, he could not control his own life, because the very thing he chased certainty never came. The children who defined the future. His son, Edward VI, ruled briefly, then died young. His daughter, Mary I of England, ruled with fire and faith, leaving a legacy of both restoration and fear. And finally, Elizabeth I, the rejected child of Anne Boleyn, rose to become one of England's greatest monarchs. In the end, Henry's obsession with a male heir failed to define the future. It was his daughters who shaped it, not through force, but through resilience. The 6 women behind the crown. Each wife became a mirror of Henry's shifting nature. A loyal queen discarded, a revolutionary executed, a perfect wife who died too soon, a survivor who escaped, a young queen destroyed, a strategist who endured. Together, they tell a story not just of marriage, but a survival under absolute power. Some lost their lives. Some lost their freedom. Some lost everything but endured. And one helped build the very future Henry never understood. The king and the cost. So what remains of Henry VIII? A reformer? A tyrant? A visionary? The truth is more complex. He was all of them. A man shaped by fear. A ruler driven by obsession. A king who believed control could conquer fate. But in the end, he discovered the one truth no crown can escape. Power cannot protect you from loss. Not of love. Not of legacy. Not of life. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark world of Henry VIII and his 6 queens, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon, because on the Crit Stories, history isn't just told, it's felt.